We should be good to go. All right. Hey, everybody, this is Julie Garcia. Julie is a very good friend of mine. She's an Apple Distinguished Educator. She's incredibly fun to be around. Julie and I have traveled to different places in the world on educational purposes. And I think that's one of the things that I love about her. She's incredibly smart academically, but she's also a realist when it comes to problem solving in the classroom. And she just knows a lot of stuff. She's been in education for over 20 years. And she is, she's at the San Diego Unified School District in San Diego, California. And, I want to celebrate, promote the voices of Port Clinton City Schools. And from time to time, I want to bring in people from outside. And I just put a call for help of some educators who I admire outside of our school district. And boy, Julie answered the call immediately. And I think she'll offer some tips and some suggestions and some tools on how we can do better with formative and summative assessments. So Julie, thank you very much for being here. And I know I'm going to learn today, and I'm just thankful that I can share you with my school district.
All right. Thank you very much. And thank you for having me. Again, Julie Garcia. I kind of joke that I'm a recovering math teacher. I taught math in middle school for 20 years and am now in the district office helping lead my team in instructional and technology integration. So I'm super excited to be here with all of you. If it's okay, because it's such a short time period, I'm going to kind of go through and kind of talk through my slides and then try to keep the last 5 minutes. Hopefully there are some. Hopefully there are 5 minutes to answer any questions that some of you might have about what I talk about. So today, the outcomes for today is we want to really review just a little bit of research around formative and summative assessments. We're going to discuss some tools and ideas for summative and formative assessments, and then really reflect on how those assessments support teachers and students in teaching and learning. And so how all of these pieces are really part of this cyclical approach to our instruction. It's not something we do at the end of the week or something we do at the end of the school year to see how things go. I had a really great teacher in a leadership program I was in who really helped us narrow down on the idea of summative and formative assessments. And one of his examples he did, and he was actually in a physical space and crinkled up a ball of paper and tossed it into the trash can like the hoop. And he said, just keep your eye on the hoop. And we started counting, or in the trash can, how many pieces of the paper hit the hoop. So our summative assessments are really when we're just looking at that hoop, looking at the basketball hoop. Did it go in or did it go out? And it's kind of a yes or no piece, and it's at the end. It's after the basketball's already been tossed. But what we like to do is look at the entire process. So how is the player standing before the hoop? What is the stance? What is the hand? What are the gestures? What is the angle that the ball is being sent towards the hoop? And really, those are our formative assessments. So it's really easy to look at that end result. It either made it or it didn't. But where the real work happens is looking at the process that gets us to that end result. And hopefully we'll have plenty of time today to talk about that, because that's what formative assessments are. And that's how formative assessments can lead us to be successful in those summative assessments. I also have kind of a funny, well, it's not really that funny, but a story of a colleague that I used to work with, and we all taught math together, and we taught a lot of the same lessons. And one day there was just this really bad lesson. Full disclosure, it was, bad lesson planning, probably bad implementation, but the kids just didn't get it. And I walked out to the little patio because, we have outdoor schools. We're hanging out outside, talking down the aisle, talking around the bungalow. And I said to my teaching partner, I'm like, wow, that was a horrible lesson. I totally bombed that lesson. The kids didn't get it. And my teaching friend or partner says, he goes, oh, really? I don't know. Wasn't that bad? And I was like, well, did your kids get it? And he goes, well, I don't know. We'll find out on the quiz on Friday. So that's a perfect example of him my teaching possibly different from his, and that my entire lesson had built in checking in formative assessments to really see how things go, where others just might wait for that end result. So it's really important that we look at the process, we look at the basketball shot, not just whether it makes it in the hoop or not. So I know a lot of people have may or may not have heard of John Hattie, but John Hattie does some research around things that make a positive impact in our classrooms. And he has identified an effect size, which means that students will typically make a year's worth of growth if you do this type of strategy. So if you look at this list of strategies, you see there's homework, there's class size reduction, there's parental involvement, and you see these different levels of effect size. Well, what Hattie has told us is that there is an effect size of 0.75 for feedback, an effect size of 0.91 for when a teacher provides formative teacher evaluations, when the teacher is performing those formative assessments, or a 0.75 when a teacher is providing that positive feedback. And so the effect size of a 0.4 means that if you implement this strategy, your students will make 1 year growth. But what Hattie discovered is that through feedback and through formative teacher evaluation or formative assessments from the teacher, that they noticed almost 2 years worth of growth for these students. So we can see that there is some research that shows that formative assessments, or really analyzing the basketball shot, right, not just looking at the hoop, can really help our students. So one of the things that we've done in our district is look at this kind of continuum of assessments. And this is adapted from an article, Moving from Piecemeal to Effective Formative Assessment Practice. And like I said to Kelly earlier, I'll provide a PDF of all these slides for you to come back and refer to. But here in our district, we're looking at this big, broad approach to assessments. And I really like the way this diagram breaks it down. Looking at the far right, you can see those are our annual assessments. So here in California, those are our state annual assessments for math, language arts, science. And then we break it down, and it goes into more and more detail. There's quarterly assessments that, like our district used to and are going back to, benchmark assessments, where every quarter we provide a more summative assessment type approach where we can check in. But what I really want us to focus down to is the unit, the weekly, the daily, and then even the minute by minute. So thinking about how we as educators in our classrooms are really checking in on students minute by minute. And this can be in different ways. It can be through a shared collaborative Google Doc that we've pushed out in Google Classroom. This could be a discussion where we have students engage in that discussion in Google Classroom. It could be just walking up to the student and talking to that student, but really making sure that those minute by minute and daily assessments exist in our classrooms, so that way we can continuously monitor what students are doing, how they're doing on the work, and then gauge our instruction accordingly. Every day should finish up with some sort of a reflection. What do my students know? What's the evidence of what they know? And what am I going to do next because of that? So something that we really use in our district, and especially in my technology department, is the Universal Design for Learning. Universal Design for Learning has these different guidelines that we look at, but the two that I really want to focus on are means of engagement and action and expression. So in all of our instruction, we start with the middle one, the representation, and that's how are we sharing content to students in different ways? Is it through video? Is it through podcasts? Is it through infographics? Or am I just standing there lecturing my students? We want to make sure we're providing those multiple means. Now, engagement, this is where our formative assessment comes in. How are we engaging students? Do we have note-taking guides? Do we have frequent check-ins? Is there a quick check for understanding to see how the lesson's going before we progress? And then action and expression. We really want to look at how students are sharing what it is they're learning. After a lesson, after a week of learning, or after a unit of study, what are students doing to show us that they actually learned the content and the standards we wanted them to? And the question here is really, how do we move beyond that traditional test or quiz for assessment? So formative and summative assessments, they don't have to be tests, right? How are we checking in on students in more engaging and innovative ways? So when I bring all these things together, the universal design for learning, how we're providing those multiple opportunities, then we look at where many of those multiple opportunities might be sitting in this kind of assessment spectrum. And then really trying to think of how we move away from the traditional tests and quizzes. Then we can really wrap our heads around being creative and understanding what students do and do not understand about our lessons. And while this, excuse me, while this whole session isn't really about all technology, technology has a lot of benefits and can help us get to these end goals. I remember being a classroom teacher and being involved in professional learning communities, and my PLCs and our principals would come in and they'd want to look at benchmark assessments, and they'd want to look at test scores, and they'd want to look at this data to help you plan your lessons. But for me, it was the minute by minute and that daily data that really helped guide and provide feedback on what my students could and could not do. So what I'd really like to do is take a little bit of time to break down and discuss just some examples of formative and summative assessments. So I'm going to start at the end of the spectrum with the summative assessments. And we really know that these summative assessments really tell us, what did the kids learn after this unit or this quarter of instruction? It's that end result. It's the reflection on learning, whereas formative is the reflection for learning. What is, how are we progressing towards our learning goals? So as we discuss some ideas for alternative assessments, I want to remind you again of that universal design for learning. How are we providing students different ways for sharing their learning? Here in California, we have a large number of language learners. How are our language learners given the opportunity to share what they've learned? So here we have some examples of things that we really believe in. There are different ways for having our students share, rather, again, remember, moving away from that traditional quiz or test. So as you're thinking through summative assessments, as you're thinking of that end of the unit assessment to really see what students know, I challenge you to try to be creative in finding different ways about assessing students. I know in my experience with online learning and teachers teaching in these, from their homes and kids at school, the biggest question from our teachers was, how do I know they're not cheating? How do I know they're not going to Google the answers to a test? And maybe sometimes we need to ask ourselves is, if you can Google it, should it really be a question on a test? Is that asking students to synthesize thinking, to apply higher order thinking skills? Is it asking them to really make connections between everything they learned in that unit to the real world? So there's some alternative assessments that we like to look at as examples of things that are an alternative or different from that test or that 5-paragraph essay. Illustrations. Many of our language learners can share, or students that struggle with writing, or just students that really, maybe they're assets and maybe what they really enjoy doing is drawing. Maybe they'd rather share their understanding of a unit of study through sketchnoting or a picture or some way of sharing their learning in a creative way. Again, that's that universal design for learning, means of expression. How about allowing students to share things through infographics? When I was in the math classroom, I might have my students create an infographic about slope, and there'd be requirements, and students would have to, I was a math teacher, so excuse the math examples. But rather than give them a test on slope, have them explain to me what slope is in an infographic with pictures and videos or different ways to share that. The next is I love using video as a means of assessing students. In my math classroom, not necessarily even just summative, I'd use these for formative, but I would have a student explain their thinking of a math problem through video. You could have students make a public service announcement. I collaborated with our science department one year to do a challenge-based learning project on teen health. And students explored different areas of teen health issues like obesity, stress, those kind of questions. And then we worked with the science department and the math department. The math students created surveys. They used surveys to learn about these teen health issues within their community. And then we created public service announcements to teach our other schools in our community about these teen health issues. So students had to learn the statistics. They had to use those statistics to then share a message to others through these public service announcements. And then there's always the, video of teaching others. I used to have a flipped classroom, and I would assign students, I'd say, instead of watching Miss Garcia's video tonight, as a reminder, we're going to watch somebody else's. So having students create videos to teach others, you'd be amazed at what kind of learning and understanding you can glean from their projects that they create. In addition to these more creative types of summative assessments, we also love using digital portfolios as a way for students to collect work along the way, to go back and reflect on their learning, to share their learning with a wider audience. Student-led conferences are another great way for summative assessments, and also exhibitions of learning. So there is a website called Share Your Learning. And it's the whole idea about students really having this purpose to share their learning with an authentic audience and in a way that makes sense to them. Again, trying to find those ways to move beyond that quiz or that test. So here's an example of student exhibitions where students share their learning for a public audience. Here's an example. This is an older one, but this is an example of math videos that my students used to create to show linear equations and graphs.
Here you can see that before we light the candle, it is at 5 centimeters. Here you can see that the candle is lit. That represents that the candle goes down -5 centimeters per minute.
Elijah is training to enter a jumping jack competition, and he is trying to tell if he has enough endurance. First, we made a plan.
Okay, so I'm going to pause there and just kind of share a little bit about, these videos. Students, this was their summative assessment for a unit, which used collecting data, creating tables, creating graphs, interpreting graphs, looking for trends in those graphs. And these students didn't just create these videos. These students storyboarded the videos. They wrote a script for the videos. They did peer review for these videos for academic vocabulary and math content. So I think my point in some of these summative assessment types is to show that when we do these alternative types of assessments, we can really engage the peer-to-peer conversations, and students can even grade each other's projects using rubrics and be part of each other's work. Not only does that create that collaborative feeling in the classroom, it provides students with an authentic audience, knowing that someone else is going to look at that work rather than, again, excuse me, that essay or that test that's just turned into the teacher. So now I'd like to jump into some formative assessments. And again, our formative assessments, we're moving away from the basketball hoop. Did it make it in? Did they learn it? Did they not? Now we get to look at how they're learning it. What's going on in their heads? Where are they? Where do I need to teach a little more of? And so on. So I like to highlight again, you'll notice some of these are very similar to the summative assessments, but non-typical formative assessments. So exit slips, there's digital exit slips, or there's just a piece of paper. What do you still need to learn about today's lesson? Observations. We encourage teachers to continuously be walking around the classroom, taking notes, highlighting what's going on, and calling on those students that might be struggling to share something with the class, or to highlight somebody that went above and beyond. There's conferring. We always should be connecting with our students. How many times do you talk to a student? I was middle school, so I saw 180 something students a day. Could I make sure that I spoke to or asked a question to each of those students every day? Quick drawings. And then again, like we talked about in the summative assessments, moving away from that everything is for the teacher. Here's my essay. Here's my test. How can we engage students in the peer review process and having them support and move their learning forward? Think alouds and digital tools as well. So now I'd like to touch on some of the digital tools that we love to use. And I'm going to first start with some of our basic tools, and you'll see in a minute why I've really grouped these into two separate pieces. So I think some of these might be very familiar to some. Kahoot is that fun little game where students respond to questions, and you can do it for speed and accuracy. And by all means, this is not a complete list. These are just some examples. There are so many quizzes and Quizlet and other tools out there. Socrative is a great tool for asking questions. There's multiple choice. The students can do a quick free response. You can display the responses on the screen for students in the classroom to view, make comments on, and privately see each other's work. There's Poll Everywhere. This is a new one for some of us. Blooket, I think is how you say it. I'm not sure. It's a kind of fun kind of Kahoot type game. And then there's Edpuzzle. If you haven't heard of Edpuzzle, where you can share a video with students, but you can put checkpoint questions along the way of the video. So you can pause and ask a question. As I did a lot of videos for my math classroom so that students could work at their own pace. So putting those questions in and seeing how students answer as the video goes, rather than them just sitting and listening to the video. So the reason I put these as a level 1 is because in a lot of cases, they're just a sentence type response or a multiple choice to see how many people answer what question. These are some of my favorites for kind of level 2 in how can we make learning more visible or collaborative. So one tool is Formative. And the reason we love Formative is because students can draw on Formative, so there's more interactivity. And then a lot of teachers really like Formative because you can upload documents and make those your formative assessment tool. So say you have a PDF of something from a curriculum you're using, you can bring that right into Formative and create questions. And those questions on Formative can be multiple choice, free response, and you can draw. So as a math teacher, I would always upload something that had the X and Y axis, and students could draw a graph for me. And then as a teacher, I'm watching these answers come in. So I could be walking around my math classroom with my iPad, and as students were working through a math task, I could see which students were struggling on my iPad, and I could go and check in with them, or I might even grab 3 or 4 of them and pull them aside for some small group and targeted work. And that's a perfect example of how we should be using formative assessments, that real-time data to kind of to regroup and support students just when they need it. We're a huge fan here at San Diego Unified of Jamboard. We use Jamboard in a lot of different ways. Jamboard is a great collaborative place for students to jump in all on one, or some teachers, if you haven't seen Jamboard, it's like a series of slides, but students can draw, they can add stickies. We've had teachers engage students in number talks where each student has their own slide of a Jamboard, or there's groups, and this group of 4 is assigned assigned to this one, this slide, this group of 4 to this. The great part about Jamboard, similar to like Google Slides, but just a little easier to draw on, is that students can collaborate. We see group projects where students are planning out their group projects, or just, again, making that learning visible. Math number talks, students drawing, and as a teacher, you can just jump right in and see exactly how your students are solving the problem, all on that one Jamboard. So Padlet is another favorite. Padlet provides, going back to that universal design for learning, multiple means of expression. Padlet allows students to upload video, to upload audio, to upload pictures, and it's kind of a collaborative board where students can post responses. And again, this is really bringing peers into your formative assessment. So you can check in on, how about providing a Padlet and say, what is something you learned about, what is something you learned in class today, and what is something you're still trying to learn today? And post that to a Padlet. And then the next morning you open that Padlet and say, hey, find somebody that had a question from yesterday's lesson and partner up with them and see if you can collaborate or work with them on an area of need. So again, using these tools can also help us remove that teacher-centered focus. And I'm running out of time, Kelly. I knew this would happen. Another one is Pear Deck. Pear Deck is a tool that we use in San Diego Unified to go with Google Slides. Pear Deck, you can push questions with your Google Slides. So your students have the slides in front of you. You're projecting the slides yourself. And there's drawing features. Students can draw, they can drag dots around, and it provides a lot of interactivity and feedback for the teacher. Flipgrid is another one of my favorites because it, again, aligns with that universal design for learning and allows students to share in the form of a video. So with our students being so connected to technology and TikTok and videos and Instagram, that is their medium. So when they get on a Flipgrid video and talk about what they learned in history class that day through video, a lot are very motivated with that. And then the last one is any type of screencasting program. We use Screencastify here in San Diego Unified, and allowing students an opportunity to, just think, talk me through your thesis statement of this, of your introductory paragraph. Pull up the thesis, pull up their essay, click screen recording, have the student, okay, so here's my thesis statement. This is why I said this, and this is where it's leading in my paper. So as a teacher, listening to just 20, 30 seconds of a student talking about that can be really insightful and help you provide students for their next steps for learning. So here's just an example of, say a Padlet and where you can push things to different types of responses, and they're shared responses so students can see what other people are thinking. And then of course formative with those the drawing types of things. So I'm going to skip this one for now because we're out of time. But as we're talking about next steps for formative and summative assessments, I think it's really important that we select a purpose. We don't just give an assessment for giving the assessment. We want to know what kids know. We want to know what they need next. We want to know how to guide our lessons. So don't just give the formative assessment to give it. Use it, or give it and use that information to provide next steps. Select a means for assessment, a tool, and make it an experience. Don't just make it a quiz or a test. Find videos, find engaging games, find a way for kids to do drawings, and really get into seeing and understanding what their thinking is. And last, use information for collaborative planning. So if you're working together in grade level teams or in department groups, bring those formative assessments together. Try all giving the same assessment and bring them back and use that as a launching pad for thinking through what to teach next or what to go back and teach. So really using those tools as a way to modify and adjust your instruction. So kind of a lot to cover. And like I said, I will prepare these resources for you and I'll send them off to Kelly as soon as we're done. So thank you.
Julie, you're absolutely brilliant, and it is a very short amount of time, but you know, you left us really wanting more, which is exactly where I want our teachers. And so hopefully a lot of our teachers will join on the on-demand version. And I think this was very helpful. A couple of my favorite pieces. I love the basketball metaphor that you used, but I also really enjoyed that timeline. And you provided a lot of great information and tools. Some of those tools we may have to check with Chelsea about availability and access, but absolutely great stuff. I'm wondering if anybody, I'm going to hit mute. Does anybody have any questions while we have Julie on here? Anything you'd like to ask her?
Kelly, I'm just glad to hear so many tools that we've been promoting and sharing, like hearing them from another voice in another area, especially like across the country. That's really cool to hear.
And I think most of what I covered, the free versions, you know, while not awesome, there are free versions of all of those that you can use in some format. So,
sure.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, Julie, I may reach out to you again, and I hope to return the favor to your district if any of our teachers or myself can share of anything. That was great. And I don't know, just like, I know you're super smart, but I really like how you broke it down. It was just, it was a very good path to follow.
Oh,
I feel
thank you, Kelly.
All right.
Awesome. All right.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Have a great day, everyone.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Stop recording.